A scream out of nowhere interrupted a foretold tragedy. An ignored child revealed a secret buried by ambition. An empire collapsed so the truth could come to light, and a heart once hardened by power learned to listen. Before hearing this surprising account, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how even the smallest gestures can change destinies. Tuesday morning seemed like any other for Michael Harrison. The 45-year-old businessman adjusted his Italian silk tie as he walked through the private terminal of the airport, his leather shoes echoing on the gleaming floor. His private jet waited on the tarmac, ready to take him to the capital for a meeting that would define the future of his construction company. 3 multi-million-dollar contracts depended on his presence that afternoon. His cell phone vibrated, incessantly with messages from his advisors, last-minute details about the negotiations. Michael barely paid attention to the movement around him. The terminal was his familiar territory, where everything functioned with Swiss watch precision. Employees greeted him with reverence, pilots checked routes with military efficiency, and his assistant, Melissa, organized documents with her usual dedication. That's when she appeared. A girl of approximately 12 years old came running from the cargo area, her worn sneakers pounding against the floor in a desperate cadence. Her clothes were dirty, her hair disheveled, and her eyes carried an urgency that cut through the air like a siren. "Sir, sir," she shouted, pointing directly at Michael. "Don't get on that plane. They sabotaged it. It's going to explode." The entire terminal turned to observe the scene. Security guards immediately approached, ready to remove the girl. Michael raised his hand, paralyzed by the intensity of her gaze. There was something in those eyes, a raw, desperate sincerity that made him hesitate. "What are you talking about, little girl?" he asked, his voice controlled despite his internal confusion. "I heard them talking. Last night here near the boxes where I sleep. They talked about your plane, about the fuel, that today you were going to—" She swallowed hard, the words tumbling out. "Please, believe me, don't get on." Melissa approached, clearly embarrassed. "Mr. Harrison, the meeting is in 2 hours. We can't be late because of a situation like this." Michael observed the girl more closely. Her clothes were clearly second-hand, but she was clean. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, and her small hands trembled, not from cold, but from genuine nervousness and fear. "How do you know about my plane?" he asked, crouching down to her eye level. "I live around here, in the boxes back there. I hear a lot of things." She pointed to the cargo area. "There are men who come at night. They do bad things. Yesterday I heard them talking about your name, about the plane, about the fuel." One of the security guards tried to approach, but Michael dismissed him with a gesture. Something about the girl's determination intrigued him. In his years of experience, he had learned to trust his instincts, and something in him was on high alert. "Captain Mitchell," he called to his pilot, "can you check the plane again, especially the fuel system?" The pilot, an experienced man with graying hair, nodded and headed toward the aircraft. Michael continued observing the girl, who was now surrounded by curious onlookers and terminal employees. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emily," she replied, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "Are you going to believe me?" Before Michael could answer, Captain Mitchell came running back, his face pale and his expression grave. "Mr. Harrison, there's a strange smell. In the fuel tank, it's not normal. I need a complete inspection before any takeoff." Michael's heart raced. He looked at Emily, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and terror in her eyes. "Everyone away from the plane, now," he ordered with authority. "Call the emergency team and cancel the flight." The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Employees ran in all directions, security equipment was activated, and the perimeter around the aircraft was isolated. Michael kept Emily close to him, protecting her from the confusion that had broken out. Then it happened. The explosion was deafening. Orange flames rose into the sky, transforming what minutes before had been a $5 million aircraft into smoldering wreckage. The impact threw everyone to the ground, glass shattered, and sirens began to sound throughout the terminal. Michael protected Emily with his body, both prostrate on the ground as metal pieces rained around them. When he finally raised his head, reality hit him like a punch to the stomach. He should have been inside that plane. "Emily!" he shouted, searching for the girl amid the smoke and panic. But when the dust settled and he managed to stand up, she had disappeared. Firefighters and paramedics arrived within minutes. Michael was examined but was physically unharmed. Mentally, however, he was in shock. An unknown girl had saved his life, and now she was gone as if she had never existed. "Mr. Harrison," Melissa approached, visibly shaken, "the investigators want to speak with you, and the press is already arriving." Michael nodded absently, his eyes still searching for Emily among the crowd of rescuers and onlookers. Who was that girl? How did she know about the sabotage? And why had she warned him? More importantly, where was she now? While answering the first questions from investigators, a single certainty formed in his mind. He needed to find Emily, not just to thank her, but to understand. His ordered, predictable life had been saved by a child who apparently lived in the shadows of the airport. The meeting in the capital would be rescheduled. The contracts could wait. For the first time in years, Michael Harrison had a priority that didn't involve money or business. He had a life debt to repay. As investigators worked among the smoldering wreckage of his aircraft, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He would not leave until he found answers. And mainly, until he found Emily. The businessman who had always controlled every aspect of his life now found himself dependent on a street girl to understand why he was still alive. And this realization haunted him more than any business he had ever lost. Night was falling over the airport when Michael finally left the terminal, but not before taking one last look at the cargo area where Emily had said she slept. Tomorrow, he would return. And he would keep returning until he found her. Some questions, he knew, couldn't wait. The night had barely ended, and Michael was already back at the airport. He hadn't been able to sleep for even a minute. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the explosion, heard Emily's desperate voice, felt the heat of the flames that could have been his end. At 5 in the morning, he gave up trying to rest and headed back to the terminal. The place still showed signs of what had happened. Debris had been removed, but the smell of burned fuel persisted in the air. Isolation tape still surrounded the area where his jet had disintegrated. Michael observed it all with a mixture of gratitude and unease. "Mr. Harrison?" a female voice interrupted him. He turned and saw a woman of approximately 35 years, brown hair tied back in a ponytail, carrying a folder and a recorder. "I'm Carol Matthews, investigative journalist with Channel 7. Could I talk to you about what happened yesterday?" Michael hesitated. He normally avoided the press, preferring that his staff handle public matters. But something in the determined look of the journalist made him reconsider. "What exactly do you want to know?" he asked cautiously. "The truth about the girl who saved you, and about why someone would want to sabotage your plane." This response fully captured Michael's attention. "Do you know something about Emily?" Carol smiled slightly. "I know that she didn't appear by chance. And I know that you're not the first person that certain individuals wanted out of circulation." They headed to a cafe in the terminal, away from curious ears. Carol opened her folder and pulled out a series of documents and photographs. "For 3 months I've been investigating irregularities in major construction companies in the region. Your company, Harrison Construction, appears in several reports I obtained through confidential sources." Michael frowned. "My company is clean. All our projects undergo rigorous inspections." "That's what the official documents show." Carol agreed. "But I have evidence that these documents may not tell the complete story." She slid a photograph across the table. "Do you recognize this woman?" Michael studied the image. It was a professional ID photo of a woman about 40 years old. Dark hair, serious expression. Something about that face seemed familiar, but he couldn't place what. "Should I recognize her?" "Helen Carter. She worked as a quality inspector at your company 2 years ago. She was fired after presenting a detailed report about irregularities in 3 major projects." Michael leaned forward, interested. "What kind of irregularities?" Use of inferior materials to those specified in the contracts, alteration of plans without approval from competent authorities, and the most serious, bribing municipal inspectors to approve constructions that didn't meet safety standards. Michael's Dio. Blood ran cold. That's impossible. I would never authorize something like that. According to Helen, you may not have directly authorized it, but your signature appears on several documents approving these changes. Carol showed copies of contracts and internal memos. Michael recognized his signature on all of them, but the dates and contents didn't make sense. He remembered signing routine documents, but not the detailed specifications he now saw before him. "Where is Helen now?" he asked, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his stomach. That's the question. She disappeared soon after being fired. Her daughter, a 12-year-old girl, also vanished with her. Michael felt as if he'd been punched. "Emily? Her daughter is Emily?" Carol nodded, gravely. Helen tried to report the irregularities to the authorities, but all the documents she had saved disappeared mysteriously. Without evidence, her complaint went nowhere. She received threats and decided to flee with her daughter. But why was Emily at the airport, and how did she know about the sabotage? Street children hear many conversations that adults think go unnoticed. Emily was probably surviving around the airport, sleeping wherever she could find shelter, and apparently she heard the plan to sabotage your plane. Michael ran his hands through his hair, trying to process all the information. Who would do this and why? I have some theories, but I need more evidence. What I can say is that someone very powerful wanted you out of the way. The question is, what do you know that represents a threat? Before Michael could respond, his cell phone rang. It was Melissa, his assistant, her voice clearly altered. "Mr. Harrison, you need to come to the office immediately. The police are here with a search and seizure warrant. And there's more. They found irregularities in the documents for the Southside projects." Michael hung up and looked at Carol, who had heard part of the conversation. "Looks like someone is accelerating the timeline," she said. "First they tried to eliminate you physically. Now they want to destroy you legally." "But I didn't do anything wrong." Michael stood up, agitated. "I trust my team. I sign what they present to me, but always within legality." That might be exactly the loophole someone was exploiting. Your trust. Carol put away the documents. "Michael, you need to think carefully. Who in your company would have access to your documents? Who could forge your signature or make you sign things without noticing the real content?" Michael closed his eyes, searching his memory. His trusted team was small. Melissa, who had been with him for 5 years, Robert Sullivan, his minority partner and operations director, and Dr. August Freeman, the company's lawyer who prepared all important contracts. "I need to go to the office," he finally said. "But first, I want to find Emily. She might be in danger." "I agree. If someone discovers that she was the one who alerted you about the sabotage, they might try to silence her." Carol stood up too. "I have some contacts who work with street children. I'll activate them to look for her." They exchanged phone numbers and separated. Michael headed quickly to his office, his mind buzzing with possibilities and suspicions. Who in his company was betraying him? And more importantly, were Emily and her mother Helen safe? On the way, he received another call from Melissa. "Mr. Harrison, the situation here is very serious. The investigators found documents suggesting systematic overpricing and use of inadequate materials. And there's more. They discovered an offshore bank account in your name that you claim not to know about." Michael stepped harder on the accelerator. Someone was orchestrating his destruction in a meticulous and efficient manner. First they tried to kill him, now they were destroying his reputation and company. But they had made a mistake. They underestimated a 12-year-old girl. When he arrived at the office, Michael found the place in total chaos. Police officers were carrying boxes of documents, computers were being seized, and employees were whispering in groups, clearly frightened. That's when he saw Robert Sullivan having an intense conversation with one of the investigators, gesturing and pointing to papers. Something in his partner's body language bothered him. Robert seemed too comfortable for someone whose company was being investigated. Michael approached, but Robert didn't see him coming. "I'm sure that Michael wasn't..." Aware of these irregularities, he heard Robert saying to the investigator, he was always very confident, signed documents without reading them in detail. It was easy. Robert stopped abruptly when he noticed Michael behind him. His eyes revealed a flash of panic before he composed himself. Michael, good that you're here. I'm explaining to the investigators how our division of labor worked to clarify any misunderstanding. Michael observed him carefully. Robert Sullivan had been his partner for 3 years, taking 30% of the company in exchange for a large initial investment. He had always seemed competent and loyal, handling the operational part while Michael focused on major negotiations. But, now watching him more carefully, Michael noticed signs he had ignored. Excessive nervousness, sweat on his forehead, the way he avoided direct eye contact. "Robert," said Michael calmly, "I need to talk to you, in private." Robert's expression changed almost imperceptibly, but Michael caught the exact moment when fear replaced composure in his eyes. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit, and the picture that was forming was more sinister than Michael had ever imagined. Someone very close had been playing a deadly game, and Emily, a girl who should be in school instead of sleeping among airport boxes, had been the only one with enough courage to prevent this game from reaching its tragic end. Now Michael had to decide, who could he trust in a world where even those closest could be enemies? The private conversation with Robert never happened. Before Michael could isolate him, his partner claimed a family emergency and rushed out of the office, leaving only promises of later explanations. Michael stood watching through the window as Robert got into his car and disappeared into traffic, taking with him answers that could clarify the entire situation. The rest of the day was a bureaucratic nightmare. Lawyers arrived, documents were analyzed, and Michael discovered that his company was being investigated by at least 6 different agencies. $1 million contracts were suspended, banks froze accounts, and the press began to speculate about his possible arrest. But none of that mattered as much as the phone call he received at 7 in the evening. "Michael." Carol's voice was tense. "I found Helen." Michael felt his heart race. "Where? Is she okay, and Emily?" "She's alive but very scared. I can't talk over the phone. Meet me at the address I'll send by message. And Michael, come alone." Helen only agreed to talk because I promised that you would come unaccompanied. The address was in a part of the city that Michael rarely visited, a lower middle-class neighborhood with narrow streets and simple houses. He parked in front of a small yellow 2-story house where Carol was waiting for him on the porch. "Is she here?" he asked, looking around. "Not exactly." Carol guided him inside the house. "This is Dorothy Richards's house, an activist who helps people in vulnerable situations. Helen has been in hiding for months, but when she heard about what happened yesterday, she agreed to talk." The living room was modest but welcoming, with floral fabric sofas and family photographs on the walls. A woman of about 60 years with grey hair and a kind look approached. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Dorothy. Helen is very nervous, but she knows she needs to tell the truth. Please be patient with her." Michael nodded, feeling strangely humble in that simple environment. He was used to meetings in luxurious offices, not to conversations in living rooms where the aroma of homemade coffee hung in the air. Helen appeared in the door that led to the back of the house. Michael recognized her immediately from the photograph Carol had shown, but the woman before him seemed to have aged 10 years in too. Her hair was shorter and dyed blonde, an obvious attempt at disguise. Her clothes were simple, and her eyes carried a mixture of fear and determination. "Mr. Harrison," she said with a firm voice, despite her trembling hands, "thank you for coming." "Helen, first of all I need to know, is Emily okay? Where is she?" Helen's face softened for a moment. "She's safe. Dorothy has contacts at a shelter specialized in protecting children at risk. Emily is there, studying, having 3 meals a day." Her voice broke. "For the first time in months, she has a bed to sleep in." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. "Why were you living on the streets? What happened after you were fired?" Helen sat on the sofa, took a deep breath, and began to tell a story that chilled Michael's blood. "When I discovered the irregularities, I thought it was my duty to report them. I worked 3 years at your company, always with dedication. I respected you, believed in the integrity of Harrison Construction. She paused, looking directly at Michael. But when I started investigating some inconsistencies in the quality reports, I discovered something terrible. What kind of inconsistencies? Materials being replaced with cheaper versions after the initial inspections, plans being altered during construction, creating structures that didn't correspond to the approved projects, and the worst, official. Documents being falsified with your signature. Michael leaned forward. Who was doing this? Robert Sullivan coordinated everything, but he wasn't alone. Helen removed a folder she had brought with her. I kept copies of some documents before they discovered my investigation. Look at this. She showed a series of printed emails, internal memos, and photographs of constructions. Michael recognized several projects, but the details documented by Helen revealed a frightening reality. This is Blue Garden Residential. Helen pointed to photos of a foundation being built. The project specified high-strength steel, but look at what was actually used. She showed close-ups of visibly inferior materials. This construction could collapse with a moderate earthquake. Michael studied the evidence, feeling nausea growing in his stomach. But I signed the contracts. How did I not notice these changes? Because the documents that reached your desk were different from those that were implemented at the construction site. Robert controlled the entire flow of information. You signed legitimate projects, but completely different specifications were followed at the constructions. Carol, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Helen, tell him about the threats. Helen's face contorted. When I presented my report to the Human Resources Department, Robert knew within hours. He called me to his office and completely changed. He said I had misunderstood everything, that I was creating unnecessary problems. And then? I was fired the next day. Alleged cause. Professional incompetence. When I tried to take my evidence to the authorities, I discovered that all the documents I had saved on my company computer had disappeared. All that remained were some physical copies I had hidden at home. Helen showed more documents, but what really scared me were the night visits. Men in dark cars parked in front of my house. My phone started making strange noises, and then she paused, clearly disturbed by the memory. Go on, Michael gently encouraged. Emily came back from school one day saying that a man had asked about me at the gate. He offered candy and said he was Mommy's friend. That night I decided we couldn't stay anymore. We took only the essentials and left. Michael felt anger growing inside him. Why didn't you come to me? I could have helped. Helen laughed bitterly. Come to you? Mr. Harrison, your signature was on all the fraudulent documents. How could I know if you weren't involved? The question hit Michael like a slap. He realized that in Helen's eyes, he was the head of a criminal organization, not a victim. But Emily saved me, he said confusedly. Why would she do that if she believes I'm guilty? Because Emily is a wise child, Helen answered with affection. She said she observed you at the airport several times. She said you seemed different from the bad men. She has a keen instinct for these things. Dorothy, who had remained quiet preparing coffee, joined the conversation. Helen, tell him about the call. Helen hesitated, then nodded. 2 weeks ago I received an anonymous call. The voice was modified, but the person knew details about my life that only someone very close to the situation could know. They said you would be eliminated soon, and that, after that, I could come out of hiding because I would no longer represent a threat. Michael felt his blood freeze. Eliminated? The person said you were asking too many questions, starting to notice the irregularities, that it was easier to get rid of you than to try to continue deceiving you. And that's why Emily was at the airport. Helen nodded. She insisted. She said she couldn't let an innocent person be harmed, even if I had doubts about your innocence. She went there every night last week, waiting to see suspicious movements. Michael stood and walked to the window, processing the information. His own company had become a corruption machine, and he was simultaneously the legal responsible and the next victim. Helen, he said, turning to her, do you still have this evidence? I have some, but I need guarantees that I'll be safe if I testify. You'll have them, I promise, Michael paused. and I want to see Emily. That could be dangerous for her. I need to thank her personally, and maybe she heard more details about who was planning the attack. Carol spoke up. Michael, there's something else you need to know. My investigation revealed that this is not an isolated case. Robert Sullivan is connected to a corruption network that involves at least 5 major construction companies in the region. What do you mean? He uses the same scheme in several companies. He becomes a minority partner, gains the owner's trust, and gradually takes operational control. Then he implements the frauds while keeping the official owners in the dark. Michael sat down again, feeling the weight of the revelation. How many people could have been harmed by defective constructions? Thousands, Carol replied grimly. And he doesn't stop there. When owners begin to suspect they suffer accidents or are eliminated in other ways, you would be the 3rd businessman not to survive his own discoveries. The silence that followed was heavy. Michael realized he was facing something much bigger than simple corporate corruption. It was a sophisticated criminal operation, and he had been chosen as the next target. "Where is Robert now?" he asked. "Nobody knows," replied Carol. "After he left your office today, he disappeared, but I'm sure he's still in the city. He has too much business to abandon everything." Michael looked at Helen, who was observing the conversation with a tense expression. "Helen, will you testify against him? If you guarantee my daughter's safety, yes. I guarantee it. More than that." Michael paused, an idea forming in his mind. "I'll make sure that Emily has opportunities that compensate for everything you've been through." Helen smiled for the first time since Michael had arrived. "She would like to meet you. Properly." She talked a lot about the man from the plane in the last few weeks. Michael felt a strange sense of responsibility and affection. A brave girl had saved his life, and now he had the chance to save her future. But first he needed to survive Robert Sullivan and the criminal network he represented. And something told him that the battle was just beginning. 3 days passed since the meeting with Helen, and Michael felt as if he were living in a suspense film. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every phone call could bring bad news. He had settled into a discreet hotel in the city center, using a false name and paying in cash, while Carol coordinated the journalistic investigation that was gaining national proportions. On Friday morning, he finally got what he so desired: permission to visit Emily. The shelter was in a quiet residential area, a large, well-maintained house that looked more like a home than an institution. Michael was greeted by Sister Catherine, a middle-aged nun with a warm smile and perceptive eyes. "Emily is anxious to see you," she said, as she led him through corridors decorated with children's drawings. "She never stops talking about the man she saved. For her, you've become a kind of hero." "Actually, she's the hero," replied Michael, more nervous than he had ever been in his corporate life. Emily was in the back garden, sitting under a mango tree, reading a book. When she saw Michael, her face lit up with a radiant smile. She ran toward him and, to his surprise, hugged him tightly. "I knew you would come," she exclaimed, looking up with bright eyes. "Mum said you're a truly good person." Michael knelt down to her level. Looking at her up close in the sunlight, he could see that Emily was an intelligent and vivacious child, with eyes that revealed a precocious maturity forged by life's difficulties. "Emily, I came here to thank you. You saved my life. I don't have words to express my gratitude." She shook her head seriously. "I couldn't let an innocent person get hurt. Mum always taught me that we should do what's right, even when it's difficult." They sat on the grass, and Michael realized how natural it was to talk with Emily. She had a direct and honest way of expressing herself that deeply touched him. "Tell me about that night at the airport. What exactly did you hear?" Emily closed her book and concentrated. "I was sleeping among the boxes, as always, but 3 men arrived very late. I think it was almost midnight. They spoke quietly, but I hear well. Could you see their faces?" "Just one. He had grey hair on the sides and wore a very nice gold watch. The others stayed in the shadows." Michael felt a chill. The description perfectly matched Robert. "What else did they say? They mentioned your name several times. They said you were asking too many questions and that it was time to solve the problem. One of them asked if it wouldn't be better to just scare you, but the one with the gold watch said you were too stubborn and that accidents happen. Emily paused, clearly disturbed by the memory. They talked about tampering with the plane's fuel. They said it would be quick and would look like mechanical failure. Then they talked about papers and signatures, things I didn't understand well. Michael felt anger growing inside him. Robert had not only betrayed his trust, but had planned his elimination with calculated coldness. Emily, you were very brave to warn me, but why did you decide to do that? You didn't even know me. Emily smiled shyly. I observed you sometimes when I was at the airport. You always greeted the cleaning staff, asked how they were. Once I saw you give money to a man who asked for help to buy medicine for his daughter. Bad people don't do those things. Michael felt a lump in his throat. A 12-year-old child had seen something in him that he sometimes doubted he possessed. And now? Are you happy here? I am. Emily perked up. I have my own bed, food whenever I'm hungry, and I can study. Sister Catherine said I'm very good at math and science. I want to be an engineer when I grow up. An engineer? Why? To build houses that never collapse, safe houses for families like mine. The answer hit Michael like lightning. This extraordinary girl had suffered the consequences of the corruption he had inadvertently allowed in his company, and yet she dreamed of fixing the world. Emily, he said with a choked voice, when all this is over, I'd like for you and your mother to be my family. Emily's eyes widened. Like siblings. Like father and daughter, if you want. Emily hugged him again, this time with tears in her eyes. I really want to have a father, especially a father who does the right things. They spent 2 more hours together. Emily showed him her school notebooks, talked about the other boys and girls at the shelter, and Michael found himself genuinely interested in every detail of her life. For the first time in years, he didn't think about business, contracts, or profits. When they finally said goodbye, Emily held his hand. Will you be okay? The bad men might still try to hurt you. I'll be fine. I promise to be very careful. And will you come back? Every week if you want. I want. Michael left the shelter with a lighter heart than he had felt in days, but also with renewed determination. He would not just fight for his company or reputation. He would fight for Emily's right to have a family, an education, a dignified future. But that determination was immediately tested. When he arrived at the hotel, he found Carol waiting for him in the lobby with a grave expression. Michael, we need to talk. Urgent. They went up to his room, and Carol immediately closed the curtains and checked for listening devices. Robert made contact, she announced without preamble. Michael felt his blood freeze. How, when? An hour ago. He called directly to my newsroom. He said he wants to meet with you tonight. That's crazy. It could be a trap. It probably is. But Michael, he said something that changed everything. Carol paused dramatically. He claimed to have recordings of all the conversations he had with you in the last 3 years. He said he can prove that you knew everything and were the real mastermind behind the criminal operations. Michael sat heavily on the bed. That's impossible. I know you're innocent, but recordings can be edited, manipulated. If he manages to plant this version in the media before our investigation is concluded, you'll be crucified in public opinion. What does he want? Total control of the company and your immediate departure from the country. In exchange, the recordings will never see the light of day. Michael was silent for long minutes, processing the options. All seemed to lead to dead ends. Where does he want to meet? At the company office. At 10 o'clock tonight. He said, it would be symbolic to resolve everything where it began. And you think I should go? Carol hesitated. Normally I would say no. But Michael, he's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. If we can record the conversation, we might get the confession we need. Michael thought about Emily, about Helen, about all the families living in buildings constructed with defective materials. He thought about the trust in Emily's eyes when she said he did the right things. "I'll meet with him," he decided, "but not alone. The police need to be nearby." "I already thought of that. I have contacts in the task force investigating corruption. In civil construction, they can position teams around the building. And if Robert discovers them, it's a risk we'll have to take." Michael stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out before him, thousands of lights representing thousands of lives. Some of those lives depended on buildings his company had constructed. If those buildings were unsafe, he had a moral responsibility to correct the situation, regardless of the personal cost. "Carol," he said finally, "if something goes wrong tonight, I want you to promise me one thing." "What?" "Take care of Emily and Helen. Make sure they have protection and opportunities, and continue the investigation until you expose the entire corruption network." Carol approached and touched his arm. "Nothing will go wrong. You'll get through this and have the chance to be the father Emily deserves." Michael nodded, but part of him couldn't shake the feeling that the night would bring revelations that would change everything forever. At 9:30 at night, Michael was parking in front of the Harrison Construction Building. The place was strangely silent, with only a few illuminated windows in neighboring buildings. He knew that police officers were positioned at strategic points, but he couldn't see them. He took a deep breath, checked the hidden microphone that Carol had installed in his jacket, and headed to the entrance. Robert was waiting for him at the elevator, smiling as if it were a common business meeting. "Michael, punctual as always. Shall we go up? We have a lot to discuss." As the elevator slowly rose to the 10th floor, Michael studied the man who had betrayed his trust. Robert seemed calm, confident, as if he completely controlled the situation. But Michael had learned something important from Emily. Sometimes the people who seem most vulnerable are the ones who possess the greatest inner strength. And tonight, he would discover what he was truly capable of. Michael's office was exactly as he had left it 3 days ago, but now it seemed to belong to another life. Robert went directly to the presidential chair and sat down, a clearly symbolic gesture of power. Michael remained standing, observing every movement of his former partner. "You know, Michael," Robert began, slowly spinning in the chair, "I always admired your naivety. It was refreshing to work with someone who truly believed that the business world could be honest. You betrayed me, Robert. You betrayed my trust and put lives at risk." Robert chuckled softly. "Betrayal? I saved this company. When I became your partner, you were losing contracts to competitors who offered lower prices. I simply leveled the playing field. By using inferior materials and putting families in danger. Families who now have homes they can afford thanks to my methods." Robert stood up and walked to the window. "You live in an ivory tower, Michael. In the real world, everyone cuts costs. I was just more creative." Michael discreetly activated the recorder Carol had given him. "Creative enough to try to assassinate me." "Assassinate is a very strong word." Robert turned, his eyes cold as ice. "I prefer to say I was resolving an operational problem. You were starting to ask inconvenient questions, questioning reports, wanting to personally monitor constructions. It was a matter of time until you discovered our operation." "Our operation? Who else is involved in this?" Robert smiled maliciously. "Do you really believe I would do all this alone?" "Michael, this network operates in 5 states. Construction companies, suppliers, municipal inspectors, politicians. It's a perfect system that generates millions in savings and additional profits." Michael felt nausea growing in his stomach. "How many companies?" "At the moment?" 12 main construction companies, plus dozens of suppliers and subcontractors. You would just be one more businessman who suffered a tragic accident and had his company taken over by competent partners. And after my supposed elimination, I would take full control of Harrison Construction, liquidate some problematic assets, and the company would officially join our network, simple and efficient. Michael took a few steps around the room, trying to process the magnitude of the criminal operation. Robert, do you realize that you're confessing to crimes that could put hundreds of people in prison? I'm confessing to you, yes, because you're not going to tell anyone. Why are you so certain? Robert took a tablet from his jacket's inner pocket. Because I have 3 years of recordings of our conversations, carefully edited to show that you were fully aware and commanding all the fraudulent operations. He activated the device, and a familiar voice echoed in the office. It was Michael, clearly saying, "I don't care about the methods, Robert. I just want results and maximum profits." Michael remembered the original conversation. They had discussed marketing strategies to attract more clients, and he had said that he didn't care which publicity methods Robert chose, as long as they were ethical and brought results. But in the edited recording, it seemed he was authorizing any method, no matter how questionable. Impressive technology, isn't it? Robert smiled. With the right software, I can make you confess to any crime. I have hours of recorded material. That's falsification of evidence. Prove it. Against my word and these recordings, who will believe you? Robert paused the tablet. But I'm a reasonable man, Michael. It doesn't have to come to that. What do you want? Complete transfer of all your shares in the company to me. You move abroad. I suggest a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. In exchange, these recordings will never be released, and you can live comfortably with the money you already have in personal accounts. Michael pretended to consider the proposal, actually giving time for the recorder to capture every word. And if I refuse? The recordings go to the press tomorrow morning, along with documents showing suspicious bank transfers to your personal accounts, transfers that I will arrange to happen in the next few hours. You thought of everything. I have to. This isn't my first venture of this kind. Robert sat down again. You know, Michael, you should feel honored. I don't usually offer alternatives beyond physical elimination, but I always liked you. You were genuinely a good boss. Michael approached the desk, his hands resting on the mahogany surface. He had personally chosen 5 years ago. Robert, there's something you don't know. What would that be? The girl who alerted me about the sabotage. She heard your conversation that night at the airport. Robert's face changed subtly. What girl? Emily Carter, daughter of Helen. Carter, the inspector you fired. The girl who has been living on the streets because of your threats to her family. Robert stood up abruptly. Impossible. That woman disappeared months ago. She didn't disappear. She was hiding, and her daughter identified you, Robert. She described you perfectly. Grey hair on the sides, gold watch. She saw you and heard everything. A street child. Who would believe the testimony of a girl like that? An investigative journalist who is exposing your entire operation, and the authorities who are already investigating your network. Michael smiled for the first time since he arrived. Robert, you made a fatal mistake. You underestimated a brave child. Robert walked quickly to the window, looking at the street below. It doesn't matter. Without physical evidence, they can't prove anything. Actually, they can. Michael removed the hidden microphone from his jacket. This entire conversation has been recorded. And unlike your recordings, this one wasn't edited. Robert's face went livid. You idiot! Don't you realize this only makes your situation worse? On the contrary, it improved a lot. How? Because now we have your complete confession about the corruption network, the names of those involved, and the admission of attempted murder. Michael paused. And because the police are listening to every word from outside. Robert ran to the window, observing the street. Police cars with lights off were strategically positioned, and figures were moving in the shadows. You set me up. I prefer to call it justice. Robert turned, his eyes wild with desperation and anger. You don't understand, Michael. This operation is bigger than you imagine. If I fall, very powerful people will be furious. They won't stop until they destroy you and everyone you love. Then it's better to make sure they're also exposed and arrested. You're condemning your own family, and that girl, Emily, you've put her in mortal danger. Michael felt a chill of fear but maintained his composure. Emily is protected, and I won't be alone in this fight. Robert walked to the desk and opened a drawer. Michael tensed, expecting him to pull out a gun, but Robert removed only a key. This key opens a safe at Central Bank. There are all the original documents about our operation. Names, values, contracts, bank accounts, everything. He tossed the key onto the desk. If you really want justice, you'll need this. Why are you giving me this? Robert laughed bitterly. Because if I'm going down, I prefer to take everyone with me. And because, he paused, because a part of me always respected your integrity, even while finding it naive. Footsteps were approaching in the hallway. The elevator doors opened, and Michael heard authoritative voices echoing through the floor. Last chance, Michael, Robert whispered urgently. Destroy this recording, forget what you heard today, and we can get out of this together. The operation is too big to be taken down. You'll only hurt yourself. Michael picked up the key and put it in his pocket. Robert, 3 days ago, a 12-year-old girl had more courage than I've had in 3 years. She risked everything to save the life of a stranger. I won't disappoint her now. The office door opened, and federal police officers entered with guns drawn. Hands up! Both of you. Michael raised his hands calmly. I'm Michael Harrison. I'm cooperating with the investigation. Robert, however, remained motionless, looking out the window, as if contemplating one last desperate alternative. Mr. Sullivan, hands up! Robert turned slowly, a strange smile on his face. You know what the problem is with you officers? You think small. This operation has tentacles you can't even imagine. He was handcuffed without resistance, but continued talking as he was, led out. Michael, be careful who you trust. Not everyone who seems to be on your side really is. When Robert was finally taken away, Michael sat heavily in his chair. The office was silent again, but now it carried the weight of revelations that would change his life forever. Carol entered shortly after, accompanied by a federal detective. We got everything, she announced, satisfied. The confession was clear and detailed. With the evidence from the safe and Helen's testimony, we'll have enough material to dismantle the entire network. Michael nodded, but he couldn't shake Robert's final words from his mind. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone who seems to be on your side really is. What had Robert meant by that? And more importantly, were Emily and Helen really safe? Or had Michael only put the two people he loved most in even greater danger? The battle had been won, but Michael had the unsettling feeling that the war was just beginning. A week passed since Robert's arrest, and Michael discovered that winning a battle didn't necessarily mean conquering peace. His company was under federal intervention, the media constantly surrounded him, and he found himself navigating a bureaucratic labyrinth that seemed to have no end. On Thursday morning, Michael was in the improvised office he had set up in his home when Carol arrived, with an expression he had learned to fear. It was the look of someone bearing bad news. Michael, we need to talk about something I discovered, she said, sitting at the kitchen table, where he had spread documents and reports. More problems? Maybe. Remember what Robert said before being taken away? About being careful who you trust? Michael nodded. Those words had haunted him all week. I investigated more deeply into the backgrounds of some people close to you. Carol removed a folder from her bag, and I found something concerning about Dr. August Freeman. Michael frowned. Dr. August had been the company's lawyer for 4 years, responsible for all important contracts. He was a man of distinguished appearance, always well-dressed, with an impeccable reputation in legal circles. What did you discover? He's not who he appears to be. Carol showed a series of documents. August Freeman exists, yes, but the real Dr. August died in a car accident 5 years ago in another state. The man you know as your lawyer assumed his identity. Michael felt the world spin around him. That's impossible. He has a bar registration, an established office. All masterfully falsified. And look at this. Carol showed bank statements. In the last 3 years, Dr. August received regular transfers from accounts linked to Robert's network. He wasn't just your lawyer, Michael. He was responsible for preparing all the legal documents that legitimized the frauds. Michael stood, up abruptly, walking to the window. "He prepared my will last month. He has access to all my personal information, knows my schedules, and knows where Emily and Helen are being protected." Michael's blood froze. He immediately picked up the phone and dialed the shelter. "Sister Catherine, it's Michael Harrison. Is Emily okay?" "Of course she is, my child. Why do you ask?" "I need to speak with her now. It's urgent." A few minutes later, Emily's sweet voice echoed through the phone. "Hi, Daddy Michael." The word daddy still warmed his heart. "Are you coming to visit me today?" "Emily, listen carefully. Do you remember an older, well-dressed man who might have appeared there asking about you or your mother? Grey hair, glasses, always in a suit?" Emily paused, thoughtful. Yesterday a man like that was here. He said he was a lawyer and that he was handling your affairs. Sister Catherine talked with him." Michael felt panic growing in his chest. "What else did he say?" "He asked if I was happy here, if I missed my mom. He was kind, but—" Emily hesitated. "But what, dear?" "He gave me chills. He smiled with his mouth, but not with his eyes, just like the bad men I heard at the airport." Michael exchanged an alarmed look with Carol. "Emily, I'm coming to get you now. Don't leave the shelter for any reason, okay? Is something bad happening?" Michael tried to keep his voice calm. "I'm just being careful. I love you, little one." "I love you too, Daddy Michael." He hung up and immediately dialed the detective in charge of the case. "Detective Martinez, Michael Harrison, I need immediate police protection for Emily and Helen. We've discovered there are more people involved in the conspiracy." While they waited for the police to arrive at the shelter, Carol continued her online investigation. "Michael, I found more things about the fake Dr. August. His real name is Charles Montgomery, and he has an extensive criminal record. Document forgery, bank fraud, and—" She paused. "Association with criminal organizations specializing in eliminating witnesses." Michael sat down again, the weight of responsibility crushing him. "Emily was right from the beginning. She said some men were bad and others weren't. I brought danger directly to her." "Michael, don't blame yourself. You couldn't have known. I should have been suspicious. Robert was too calm during the arrest. It was as if he knew he had a plan B." The phone rang. It was Detective Martinez. "Mr. Harrison, we have a problem. When we arrived at the shelter, Emily had disappeared." Michael felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "According to Sister Catherine, the fake Dr. August returned about an hour ago with a false court order, saying that Emily should be transferred to another location for security reasons. The nun tried to contact you, but the phone was busy." Michael checked his cell phone and saw 3 missed calls. He had been so focused on the conversation with Carol that he hadn't noticed. "Where did they take her?" "We're trying to track the vehicle. The street security cameras captured a black car leaving the shelter, but we lost track of it in traffic." Michael collapsed in the chair. The girl who had saved his life was now in danger because of him. "Detective, I need all available units looking for her, and I want to speak personally with Robert in prison." "Mr. Harrison, I understand your anguish, but—" "She's my daughter," Michael shouted, surprising himself with the force of his own emotion. "Robert knows where she is. He planned this." 2 hours later, Michael was in the visiting room of the federal penitentiary, waiting for Robert to be brought in. When his former partner appeared handcuffed and in uniform, Michael barely recognized him. The elegant and confident man had been replaced by someone who seemed to have aged 10 years in a week. "Michael, what a pleasant surprise," Robert said sarcastically, sitting on the other side of the metal table. "Come to thank me for the accommodation?" "Where is Emily?" Robert smiled coldly, straight to the point. "I always admired that about you. Robert, she's just a child, an innocent child." "Innocent?" Robert laughed. "Michael, that innocent child destroyed years of planning and an operation that moved millions. She's not so innocent." Michael leaned forward, controlling his anger. "What does Charles Montgomery want?" The surprise in Robert's eyes was genuine. "Impressive. You discovered about our lawyer. Where did he take Emily?" Robert leaned back in his chair, clearly savoring the moment. "Charles is a professional, Michael. efficient, discreet, and completely without scruples. He has Emily as, let's say, life insurance. Explain. If you continue cooperating with the authorities, if you testify against our network, if you try to use the evidence from the safe, well, accidents happen to children too. Michael felt a primitive fury growing inside him. You're a monster. Am I? Her businessman, and now we have a new business to discuss. Robert leaned forward. You withdraw all charges, deny that the recording is authentic, and Charles returns the girl. Simple as that. And then you continue the criminal operation? That's no longer your problem. You'll have your little daughter back and can live a happy and ignorant life. Michael studied Robert's face, looking for some sign of humanity. He found none. How do I know Emily is okay? Robert signaled to the guard who approached and handed him a cell phone. A picture is worth 1,000 words, said Robert. Michael looked at the screen and his heart almost stopped. It was a photo of Emily in some kind of warehouse sitting in a chair. She looked frightened but unharmed. Holding the photo was a note in Emily's handwriting. Daddy Michael, I'm fine. The man said you'll come get me soon. My answer is no, said Michael, returning the phone. I won't allow you to continue putting families in danger. Robert sighed dramatically. I expected that response. Charles expected it too. He paused. Are you sure, Michael? Once I leave this room, there will be no more negotiations. Michael stood up. I'm sure. And Robert? Yes? You underestimated Emily once. Don't make the same mistake twice. Robert frowned, confused, but Michael was already leaving the room. Outside the prison, Carol was waiting with more news. Michael, I have an idea of where Charles might have taken Emily, and we might have a chance to save her. Michael looked at her, a new determination shining in his eyes. Emily had once saved his life by risking everything. Now it was his turn to return the favor. The bravest girl he knew would not be another victim, not while Michael had the strength to fight. The rescue operation would begin in 2 hours. And this time, Michael would not depend only on luck or the help of others. This time he himself would become the hero that Emily deserved. Carol had discovered that Charles Montgomery owned an abandoned warehouse in the industrial zone, registered under one of his aliases. It was the perfect place to keep someone hidden, isolated with no close neighbors and with multiple escape routes. Michael didn't wait for the police. Against all advice from Carol and Detective Martinez, he headed to the location alone. His only company was the small recorder he carried in his pocket. If something happened to him, at least there would be evidence. The warehouse was at the end of a poorly lit street, surrounded by other empty buildings. Michael parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, his heart beating so hard he was sure it could be heard. Through a dirty window, he could see Emily sitting in a chair in the center of the empty space. Charles Montgomery was walking around her, talking on the phone. Michael couldn't hear the words, but the tone was clearly threatening. That's when Emily did something that completely surprised him. She looked directly at the window, where Michael was hiding, and made an almost imperceptible nod with her head. She had seen him and somehow knew he would come to save her. Michael observed for a few more minutes, analyzing the situation. Charles was alone with Emily, which was an advantage. But the man was visibly larger and stronger and probably armed. He decided on the direct approach. Michael entered through the main door, which was unlocked. Charles Montgomery, he called with a firm voice. I'm Michael Harrison. I've come to get my daughter. Charles turned quickly, the phone still in his hand. He was exactly as Emily had described. Older man, well-dressed even in that situation, but with cold, calculating eyes. Mr. Harrison. What admirable punctuality. Charles put away the phone and smiled. Although I specified that you should come only after withdrawing the charges against Robert. I changed my mind. I want to negotiate face to face. Emily looked at Michael with a mixture of relief and concern. He could see that she was tied to the chair but didn't appear to be injured. There's nothing to negotiate, said Charles, walking casually to a table where Michael now noticed there was a gun. The situation is simple. You cooperate, or the girl suffers the consequences. Or, said Michael, taking a few steps into the warehouse, I offer something much better than my cooperation. Charles paused, intrigued. What could be better? Michael took a key from his pocket, the same one Robert had given him. The key to the safe with all the evidence of your operation, names, bank accounts, contracts, everything. Charles's eyes fixed on the key. Robert told me about this, but why would you voluntarily give it to me? Because I realize that fighting against you is futile. The operation is too big, has too much protection. I prefer to live peacefully with Emily than die trying to be a hero. Charles smiled, clearly satisfied, finally showing good sense. Michael approached more, keeping his hands visible. But I want guarantees. Emily and Helen stay completely out of this. We move to another city, start a new life, and you never bother us again. That can be arranged. Charles picked up the gun from the table but kept it low. The key, please. Michael extended the key, but when Charles reached to take it, Emily shouted, Daddy Michael, watch out! He has another gun hidden. Charles turned angrily toward Emily, and in that moment of distraction, Michael lunged forward, grabbing Charles's wrist and trying to control the gun. The two men fought violently, falling over boxes and abandoned equipment. Emily, despite being tied up, began to rock the chair, trying to free herself and help. During the struggle, Michael managed to activate the recorder in his pocket, and Charles's voice echoed clearly through the warehouse. You don't understand, you idiot. We are dozens. Even if they arrest me, others will continue. Emily will never be safe. Michael managed to disarm Charles, but the man was more experienced in combat. With a quick movement, Charles reversed the situation and put Michael in an arm lock. Now you're going to give me the key and watch while I permanently solve the problem with the girl. It was at that moment that sirens began to sound outside. Carol had managed to track Michael's cell phone signal and called for reinforcements. Charles, desperate, released Michael and ran toward Emily with the second gun he had hidden. But Michael was faster. He jumped in front of Emily, protecting her with his own body. No, Emily screamed. The shot echoed through the warehouse, but Michael remained standing. Charles had missed in his haste and desperation. Seconds later, police officers invaded the location, quickly subduing Charles Montgomery. Michael ran to Emily, cutting the ropes that bound her. She threw herself into his arms, both trembling with relief and emotion. You came, she whispered. I knew you would come. I will always come for you, little one. Always. 3 months later, life had found a completely new rhythm. Michael had lost his company, which was liquidated due to the irregularities, but he had gained something infinitely more valuable. He, Emily, and Helen now lived in a simple but welcoming house in a small town. Michael worked as an engineering consultant for small companies, always ensuring that all projects were absolutely safe and honest. Emily was enrolled in the best school in the region, where she quickly stood out in mathematics and science. Her grades were exceptional, but what made Michael most proud was seeing how she had regained the joy and confidence of a normal child. Helen had found work as a quality inspector at a local company, where her experience and integrity were genuinely valued. On Saturday morning, Michael was in the backyard of the house helping Emily build a science project, a model building that would demonstrate earthquake-resistant construction techniques. Daddy, Michael, said Emily, carefully gluing a popsicle stick beam, are you happy? Michael stopped what he was doing and looked at her. In recent months, Emily had begun to call him simply Dad, but occasionally she still used his full name, especially when she wanted to have serious conversations. Very happy, dear. Why? Because sometimes you get quiet and thoughtful. I worry that you miss your old life. Michael sat on the grass beside her. You know what I miss about my old life? Emily shook her head. Nothing. Absolutely nothing, he smiled. In my old life, I had a lot of money, but I didn't have you. I had a big company, but I didn't have a family. I had prestige, but I didn't have peace of mind. And now I have everything that really matters. I have you, I have your mother, I have honest work, and... He paused. I have the certainty that I'm doing the right things. Emily smiled and went back to working on the model. Dad, when I grow up and become an engineer, will we work together? That would be the greatest honor of my life. Helen appeared at the back door, smiling at seeing father and daughter working together. "Lunch is ready." As they walked into the house, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. A brave girl had saved not just his physical life, but his soul. She had taught him that courage doesn't come from power or money, but from the willingness to do what's right, even when it's difficult. During lunch, Helen casually mentioned, "Michael, a letter arrived today. It's from the court." Michael tensed momentarily, but Helen smiled reassuringly. "It's good news. The adoption process has been finalized. Officially, you are now Emily's legal father." Emily dropped her fork and ran to hug Michael. "Really? Really, really? Really, really?" confirmed Helen, with tears in her eyes. Michael hugged Emily tightly, feeling a completeness he had never experienced. All the loss, all the suffering, all the difficulties had been worth it to reach this moment. In the afternoon, while Emily played in the yard and Helen rested, Michael sat on the porch with a cup of homemade coffee. His phone rang. It was Carol. "Michael, I have news about the trial. Robert and the entire network were convicted. 23 people arrested, including politicians and businessmen. It was one of the biggest corruption scandals of the decade. And the families who lived in the buildings with problems? They're all being relocated to safe housing with compensation. Your decision to testify saved many lives." After hanging up, Michael watched Emily in the garden, chasing butterflies with an improvised net. It was hard to believe that this radiant and happy girl was the same child he had found sleeping among boxes at the airport. That night, during the usual ritual of putting Emily to bed, she asked an unexpected question. "Dad, do you believe in destiny?" Michael considered the question carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because I think maybe I was at the airport that night exactly to save you, and you needed to be saved exactly to become my dad." Michael felt a lump in his throat. "You know something? I think you're right. So everything bad that happened was worth it?" "Every second was worth it to get to you." Emily smiled and closed her eyes. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, my brave daughter." Michael stayed watching her sleep for a few minutes, amazed at the transformative power of true love. A girl had not only saved his life, but had taught him what it truly meant to live. 6 months later, Michael was in the audience at the school's science fair, watching Emily present her project on safe construction, how engineering can protect families. She spoke passionately about the importance of honesty in civil construction, about how corruption can put lives at risk, and about how each person has the responsibility to do what is right. The presentation was an absolute success, but what really moved Michael was seeing how Emily had transformed her difficult experiences into wisdom and determination to help others. After the awards ceremony, Emily won first place in her category. She ran to Michael. "Dad, did you see?" "I did." I saw everything, dear. I'm very proud." "And you know what's best? The teacher said my project can be presented at the state fair." Michael lifted her in his arms, spinning her in the air as she laughed. Helen approached, radiant with maternal pride. "Our engineer will go far," said Helen, kissing Emily's forehead. "We'll all go far," corrected Michael. "Together." That night at home, Michael helped Emily store the trophy in her room. Next to the bed, she had created a small altar with family photographs, her favorite books, and in the center, a framed photo of the three of them together on the day the adoption was formalized. "Dad," said Emily, already in pajamas, "can I ask you a question?" "Always." "Do you still think about those bad men sometimes?" Michael sat on the edge of the bed. "Sometimes. But you know what I think about more?" "What?" "I think about how a small, brave girl changed the world. At least, she completely changed." "My world," Emily smiled. "You changed my world too, Dad. You gave me a real family." Michael tucked her in carefully. "Emily, promise me something." "Anything." "Never lose that courage that makes you special. The world needs people like you." "I promise." "And Dad?" Yes? Thank you for believing in me that day at the airport. Michael kissed her forehead. Thank you for being brave enough to save me. When Michael left the room, he found Helen in the living room, leafing through photo albums she had begun to organize. Photos of their new life, Emily at school, family, outings, everyday moments that had become precious. Are you happy? Asked Helen, echoing the same question Emily had asked months before. Michael sat next to her, looking at the photographs. Happier than I ever imagined possible. Even having lost everything? Michael laughed softly. Helen, I didn't lose everything. I discovered what was really worth having. They sat in comfortable silence, looking at the photos. Then Helen said, Michael, there's something I never told you about Emily. What? That night at the airport, when she decided to warn you about the danger, she said something that struck me. What was it? She said, Mom, I'm going to save that man, and I'm sure he'll save us too. She was only 12 years old, but somehow she knew that you two needed each other. Michael felt tears in his eyes. She was always wiser than both of us. It's true? And you know what else? Tell me. She was right. You saved us, Michael. You gave me hope when I had lost all faith. You gave Emily a future when she had none. And you found a family when you didn't even know you needed one. Michael hugged Helen. We saved each other. That night, Michael went out to the porch and looked at the starry sky. Life had taken a turn he could never have predicted. He had lost a company but gained a family. He had lost millions in money but discovered riches that couldn't be accounted for. And it had all begun with a brave girl who decided that saving a stranger's life was more important than her own safety. Michael smiled, knowing that tomorrow would be another day in the new life that Emily had made possible. A life where every decision was guided by honesty, every project was built with integrity, and every moment was valued for the true love of a family that had chosen to be together. The girl who had saved his physical life had, in fact, given him a